Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughn Manor, where Roger and I have returned, fighting for your rights in our satin tights. Right, Roger? Because it's Wednesday. That means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue over on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And this week, we're talking about a character I don't know enough about, Roger. And that's Wonder Woman. We're talking about Wonder Woman. And I never read a ton of Wonder Woman comics when I was younger. I have read some, but not enough. Not enough to really know the character like I know a lot of other DC Comics characters. And so I still have questions about Wonder Woman, Roger. And I was thinking about this a few weeks ago when I was reading the new history of the DC universe. And I was thinking, there's a lot about Wonder Woman I don't know. This is another character from DC Comics that, of course, has been revamped and restarted 1,000 times. And so it's kind of hard to know, what is her history? And some things about Wonder Woman are confusing. Like, can Wonder Woman fly or not? Because sometimes it seems like she can fly and sometimes she can't fly. It depends on which comic book you read and when the comic book was produced. And if she can fly, why does she have that dumb invisible plane? It's a mystery. And so I thought, I better start delving into these mysteries and learn more about this character that I don't know enough about. Because most of what I know about Wonder Woman is from her appearances in other comic book characters' books. And though I have read some Wonder Woman, although the stories that I've read are all very spread apart and seem to conflict in various ways, which makes sense. Because like I said, DC comic books, it's like that. And so I thought, where should I start with Wonder Woman? I feel like I need to read some Wonder Woman comics and learn more about this character. So instead of going back to the very beginning, which I will do eventually, I decided I'd go to the 1980s, right after Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is where I started with Superman when I was, much younger than I am now. And Crisis on Infinite Earths, the big DC Comics event, which revamped the entire DC universe, revamped a bunch of characters from the DC universe, including Superman, most famously, was started from scratch by John Byrne. But the same thing was done with Wonder Woman by George Perez. And George Perez, amazing artist, just legendary. He was brought on to draw Wonder Woman, and he became a co-plotter on the first issue of Wonder Woman. And it is the first issue that we're talking about today, the first issue from 1986, which tells the origin story of Wonder Woman. But it also goes back further in time to tell the origin story of the Amazons. So that's pretty cool. Now, I do have the first few issues of this run. I did pick those up. And I read them, but it was so long ago I don't really remember them. So I have the first few issues of this series somewhere. But fortunately, I do have this big omnibus. And George Perez's artwork is so detailed and beautiful that the omnibus is a pretty good way to read this story. He just does incredible work. And this is a great book, by the way. This first omnibus has an introduction by George Perez from back in 2003. And Wonder Woman had this very fantastic wraparound cover. And at the top, we see Ares, the god of war, who is the big bad in these issues of Wonder Woman. It's just fantastic. So we go to the first issue, and look at that. That's cool. And we go way back further than you would expect. We start at the dawn of humankind. We have a caveman mistreating this poor cave woman, and he ends up killing her, freeing her spirit to shoot into the sky. And then we travel to 1200 BC, Mount Olympus, and look at that. That is just, look at the amount of detail on Mount Olympus there. That's just incredible. And that's just the opening splash page for this issue of Wonder Woman. And inside the halls of mighty Olympus are the Greek gods. And the Greek gods actually play a very important part in the Wonder Woman story. And we start off with our villain Ares railing against the other gods. He's being very warlike, and he's becoming a danger, Ares is, not just to humankind, but to the other gods as well. He's just that villainous and warlike and violent. He's awful, Ares. And something must be done. And the female gods get together, and they come up with the idea to create the Amazons. And the way the Amazons are created is strange in a very Greek mythology kind of way. We've got all of the spirits of the women who have been murdered by men. So we've got the spirits of the women who have been killed by men. Those lights are the souls of women, their lives cut short by man's fear and ignorance. Gaia took them under her care before she left this planet. Now they await their rebirth. Their new destiny begins here. They have wailed in limbo for centuries. Soon they shall wail no more. And so they get together and bring down the souls into the sea, and all these beautiful women just suddenly appear from the ocean. They are the souls reborn here in ancient Greece. And those are the women that become the Amazons. So we go way back, way before Wonder Woman's birth, to the beginning of the Amazons. And then we cut over to this scene where naughty Heracles, now Heracles, of course, that's the Greek spelling of Hercules. Hercules is the Roman spelling, I believe. That's why we know him most. But DC Comics Heracles is a really awful ass, and he's just a dick. And he's full of pride and anger, and he's being goaded on by this Amazon, and she's telling him, the queen of the Amazons, she thinks you're just a doofus, and he can't take that. Be silent, he says, and he rages out. But it turns out that she is just an agent of Ares, the god of war, who just wants to cause trouble. And look at him. Look how awesome that is. I mean, the artwork in this first issue is just incredible. And so he rages out. He runs across. Her name is, this is the queen of the Amazons, Hippolyte. He meets her, and they have a fight. She defeats him because he's basically a big doofus. And he's like, haha, that's fine, that's cool, let's all hang out. And so him and his army of doofus men trick their way to hang out with the Amazons, and they end up, well, let's just say it gets very dark very quickly. They use and abuse and torment the Amazons, and it gets dark in a way that you would expect from a 1986 comic book. The 80s. But they break free from their bondage, and they rebel, and we've got this awesome awesome scene here. That's great. Very symbolic picture, Roger, of the Amazons rebelling against the men and killing them all. They kill them all and are victorious. And then they end up, going to a place where men cannot follow. They are led by Poseidon, who splits the sea there, to Paradise Island. They go to Paradise Island, and they go to work, and they build a whole society and civilization on Paradise Island. But Hippolyte, the queen of the Amazons, ends up wanting a child of her own. And, she don't need no man to do it. She makes her kid out of clay. Biology. That's how it works. So she makes her kid out of clay, and again, the artwork in this is magnificent. And where are we at? Oh yeah, here she is. Open yourself to fair Artemis, that the midwife of all Olympus may enter you, and with her guidance let your spirit cry out unto the womb of Gaia. And Wonder Woman is born from the clay. And she is the only child on the whole island. So everybody's kind of raising Wonder Woman. And she grows up to be, super smart, super strong, great warrior. And she ends up, there's a contest of champions to find out who will be the Wonder Woman. And her mom doesn't want her to enter, but she does. And she, of course, defeats everybody. And she will become the representative of the Amazons. But she has to pass one final test. And this is something you don't see coming after reading all of this. A gun is pulled out, and she must use her bracelets to knock away the bullets, as we have seen a million times. Remember the old Wonder Woman television show? We saw this a bunch of times in Wonder Woman, where she knocks away the bullets. And she is given the costume of Wonder Woman. And in the next issue, look at that. That's cool. The next issue brings us Steve Trevor. Ares still being naughty. At this point, Wonder Woman has not left the island yet. But she does. She actually ends up saving, in the second issue, Wonder Woman ends up saving Paradise Island from a nuclear warhead. And so that's pretty cool. So the series just continues from there. And then Wonder Woman travels to Boston. She goes to Boston and goes and sees Steve Donoghue. And they hung out together. I'm pretty sure that was the third issue. But the first issue was just incredible. Just the artwork, the detail was just something else. It was written, I don't think I mentioned the actual writer of this first issue because it wasn't George Perez, it was Greg Potter. And Greg Potter came up with some of the ideas for this first issue. And George Perez co-plotted it. Greg Potter did the script, but eventually Greg Potter left the book and George Perez took over. And George Perez was originally signed up to do this for 6 months, but he ended up on it for years. I think he was on it he was on Wonder Woman for a while. And his version of Wonder Woman was so impressive and successful that it influenced everything that came after, from what I understand. But like I said, after this, Wonder Woman's origin was changed and revamped and changed again. And so it's been a little hard for somebody who hasn't read a ton of Wonder Woman to know exactly what's going on in Wonder Woman comics. But I think this was actually a pretty good place to start because, it has a very detailed and beautiful origin story that goes way back to the beginning with the involvement of the Greek gods. Ares is a truly terrifying villain, and it's just altogether a really impressive artistic achievement. And like I said, went on to be very popular. So I'm going to read the rest of this, but thought I'd talk about that first issue since I thought it was just so well done. And George Perez, he's known for a lot of things. He drew Crisis on Infinite Earths. He's done the Avengers. He's done everything else. But his work on Wonder Woman is just, that is the work that I hear the most about. And I can understand why rereading this stuff after all of these years. So there you go, Wonder Woman. Short little one today, Roger, because I have to go to work. I will catch you next time.